speaking. It's Philip, who used to be my boss. Philip's actually the Director of Consulting at Amberlight, and he and Filip down here in front are going to talk about using visual thinking.
Hello everyone. So this talk is about some visual techniques, visual thinking and illustration, and how you can use them to make an innovation process more user-centered. So we're really talking about the early stages of a UCD life cycle. Right at the beginning, there is no design, there's only some ideas, maybe a few opinions, a lot of hot air. And it's very hard to figure out what are the concrete kind of ideas that are going on here. And so communication becomes very important. Now visual thinking isn't anything new, it's not anything that I've invented or popularized. The credit for that goes to some of these people who've written books on the subject. They run online communities about it, and they've talked at TED conferences. And also my colleague here, Filip, who's not speaking, but he's helped tremendously in making this presentation more visual and has been involved in a lot of the examples that you'll see as we go through. Now, even though I didn't invent visual thinking, what I like to do is I like to play around with things that other people have invented and sort of experiment with how they can make my job easier. So in terms of user-centered innovation, what we're talking about here in this context is using in-depth user research, you know, a very sort of in-depth, rigorous process, and then more of a creative ideation process following that, and how visual thinking can help along the way to make it a smooth transition. In terms of what visual thinking is, one of the definitions could be that it's the use of images as tools to enhance your communication, to improve understanding, to really drive creativity and problem solving. And these are important sort of problems that we come across when we talk about innovation work and communicating different ideas that you have at that stage. So before I get really into it, I'll just talk a little bit about most of what I've been doing most of my career. So the organisation I work for does a lot of research at every stage of the UCD life cycle. So we try and go out there and, sorry about some of the graphics, we go out there and we try and find insights into user behaviour, things that the designers might not know about, and we try and help other organisations to build more usable and great experiences in their products and services. And increasingly we do this across all sorts of platforms, all sorts of technology, and as these devices become much more interconnected, there's lots more opportunities to look at multi-platform experiences, and that shifts some of the research questions more from usability and more into innovation, like what should we be doing with these technologies, what's the right way to go, which elements should we combine. And then, I apologise, this does have some of my company branding because I've pulled it out of our creds, but I think it will help me to illustrate the point I want to make. My whole life I've always thought about stuff from a kind of more scientific point of view. My A-levels were in physics, chemistry and maths, so very hard science. I then went and did a degree in psychology, but very experimental psychology, so we were taught about observing lots of participants, gathering lots of data meticulously, doing analysis on that, and then applying as many statistical methods as possible to come up with the result. After that, I did a master's in science in human-computer interaction and went into usability. And this seemed like a great approach to help designers come up with better products. You know, we were gathering all this data, we were following a very rigorous process, doing lots of analysis, and giving them firm recommendations backed up with loads of rationale. And I mean, that works great, you know, in the sort of traditional area of user-centered design where you've got rapid iterative prototyping and you're measuring that and feeding that into design. And even after you've launched, where you're monitoring the performance and you're benchmarking against competitors and you're using eye tracking. But it wasn't working so well when doing innovation research because there is nothing to measure, it doesn't yet exist. And actually going out and collecting the data, that's the easy part. If you know where to look and you know what you're doing, and you know you follow the right process, you will find lots and lots of interesting things. The technologies that are coming out now are changing the world so much that there's new user needs and new opportunities emerging all the time. What's really difficult, which is maybe 80% of the problem, is convincing the organizations to take on board some of those ideas, to really look at the important user needs. Communication becomes the real barrier. And as I've worked with designers over the years, I've become really inspired by how good they are at communicating visually and how they take a lot of the work out of sort of processing the ideas that they're trying to communicate. And about 4 years ago, I came across visual thinking. And it was really interesting because it seemed to help us solve a lot of these problems. And in fact, the irony was that some of the science of effective communication seemed to rely on using very creative techniques and almost a craft. So I'll talk a little bit more about visual thinking now. So Ryan Coleman, who is one of the guys behind VisThink, a really big online community around visual thinking, he says it's a visual approach to facilitate the thought process. So it's a catalyst that will help you get the good ideas across much quicker, especially when we're in that kind of early exploratory phase of innovation where everything's vague and you end up arguing for half an hour only to find out you're both having exactly the same idea. And it seems a lot of people, when they do these presentations, they have a profound quote. So mine comes from Picasso, who says, "I paint objects as I think them, not as I see them." So it's a great example where he has all these amazing images in his mind, and by painting them on paper, he can share them with the rest of the world, he can communicate them. And that's exactly what visual thinking is. We have all these ideas in our heads, but we can't shine a torch and see what somebody's thinking. So we have to try and get around words and language to communicate them. I guess it'd be pretty difficult to describe some of these paintings using just words. So, and it's not just artists. I mean, really, visual thinking's as old as we are, from the cave drawings that we use to document important events. Some of those images became more standardized and had meanings that could be interpreted. Then people started putting them in certain orders so that they became sentences and you could record more and more detail. And eventually that evolved into the modern languages we have today. Now, when it comes to innovation work and sharing ideas, part of what I'm proposing is maybe we've gone a little too far, and at times we have to regress a few thousand years in our evolution and go back to more of the visual thinking that we can do. So we can look at some of the knowledge that comes out of the domain of learning, and it's considered that has four main ways in which we process information and learn things. So there's visual, like here you're looking at diagrams. There's auditory, you're listening to me speaking. There's reading and writing, so we can combine words and images. And there's kinesthetic, so if you're learning to drive, the best way is just to practice. And it's generally considered that if you're going to be effective at teaching people, you want to try and combine at least 2 of these modalities, if possible more. You can also get away with 1 if it's coupled with a strong emotional reaction, or emotional experience rather. So we probably all have memories from childhood that might be triggered by a certain song or a certain smell, maybe a dish that our mum used to cook for us. So if we do scribing and visual thinking, it actually has the potential to unlock all of these modalities, because we're drawing, sketching and looking at things, we're talking about them, we're including words, and just the physical manipulation of drawing and sharing things can make that more kinesthetic. And it can be very much fun, which has the power to unlock the emotional experience as well. The studies that show as much as 83% of all the information that our brain receives from our senses and processes can be visual. So only 17% comes from all the other senses. So there's people who say they're not visual, but actually we're all biologically wired to be visual. And the whole world around us is visual. I mean, we work in UX, UI design, icons. A lot of time we don't have to think once we learn what some of the visual rules are. We respond much quicker to visual cues than we do to others. Can you work out what company this is? Right, it doesn't take long. And what most people say is that they already know it's IBM because they recognize the branding even before they've had time to think about the I and the B. So why would we use visual thinking? Well, there's a number of benefits. I'm sure you can think of others, but there's better retention of information. It's a right brain activity, which is the part of the brain responsible for creativity and emotion, so we can be more creative and come up with better ideas working this way. And the information gets processed deeper. We're thinking about it a lot more. And an image can help to get everybody to a shared vision. We're all looking at the same thing. We all understand images in more similar ways. Language can be very ambiguous, particularly when there's different teams with different jargon. And increasingly we're working in international teams, so it can help overcome language barriers. And a picture can say 1,000 words, so it can be a quicker way to get understanding. And it can be fun, and therefore unlock some emotional experiences. So how can we use the illustrators in the work that we do in visual thinking? Well, we have a research team, we do lots of research, and we've now hired as part of that team full-time trained UX illustrators, and we've trained them in techniques around visual thinking and the UX process. And so when we do innovation work, or any work really, they can help us to visualize difficult concepts and ideas, and we can explain those to users, to designers, and designers think visually anyway, and to stakeholders. So it really helps with communication. Okay, so we'll move on to the idea of innovation. Now, there's lots of different ways to talk about innovation, what the process is. For the purposes of this talk only, I'm going to talk about it in terms of stuff you can do before, kind of planning and preparing stuff. The stuff that you do during, which would be the research, because it is a user-centered process, some of the analysis and the ideation, and then what you can do afterwards to document it. And I'm really going to be talking about how you can use the illustrators and visual thinking at each of these stages just to make the communication a bit more fluid. So starting before, so this can be before a research session, before a meeting, before a workshop with stakeholders. And we might meet up with the team of stakeholders and talk about what they want to get out of this, what they were thinking. And often everything's very vague. So we can use the illustrators to try and sketch out what we've understood. And that sometimes helps to uncover misunderstandings or get everybody onto the same page. Sometimes there's disagreement between people on a team as to what they understand the problem to be. And usually at this early stage, there's no time to prepare proper stimulus like wireframes, prototypes, and it'd be inappropriate. We don't yet know where we want to go in terms of the design. So some of these sketches and illustrations that are very conceptual can later be used actually in the research itself to show to participants and get their feedback. This is an example of where we've visually tried to explain the whole process in a project just to make things clear. So it shows the frequency of different project types. It also shows the number of days we'd be spending on each activity within a particular project, both the number of days and as a proportion of the whole project. And this is an example of some of the sort of illustrations and sketches and storyboards. I'm sure we've all seen this kind of stuff before, but if you have the illustrators on your team, you can very quickly create this and adapt this and take it into research. So we used this in a project where we were doing ethnography with teenagers and how they hang out with their friends, and we were spending 5 hours with them, and towards the end of the session we were showing them some of the stuff to get feedback. I'm going to move on to the main part, which is what you can do during the research and during some of the workshops. So often during the research, the users are kind of showing us or telling us what they want in the product, what are their ideas, what are their needs. And we take the illustrators with us, so they're there throughout the process, and they're trying to get down the main crux of what the users are trying to explain to us and make sure that we've understood it. And this has a number of benefits. I mean, it first of all engages the users, so they sometimes give us more information. It means we have some nice outputs at the end of the session that we can share with designers in a more visual way. We can also share the sketches right back with the users, so they can give their feedback and tell us if we've understood what they want and if we've understood what they were thinking. Often they're not great at explaining their ideas, but when they see it down on paper, they can give a bit more feedback. So some examples, for example, what you might do early on if you're doing innovation work is some ethnographic research. So you might go out and see some people, see how they're using technology, and then the illustrators can help to capture some of that in visual form. That helps you remember, so it's a memory aid, and also to communicate. And these illustrations, they don't have to be works of art. I mean, a lot of the pictures I'm showing you have been picked out to look quite nice, but actually, you know, even back of the napkin stuff is a good way to capture stuff, to make sure you've understood, to show it back to the users and so on. Another type of research you might do during an innovation process is diary studies. So over the period of, say, a few weeks, the participants would be telling you about what they do in a given area, how they use technology, you know, their daily lives, and they might be keeping a blog online. But it's not very visual. Sometimes you can get pictures and photos, but not always. So you can use the illustrators to kind of fill in the gaps and visualize some of the key scenarios. This was a chap who were looking to see how he keeps fit in his daily routine, and one of his methods was to run up the escalators every morning and burn some calories that way. So we could visualize that. The other thing that you can visualize from diary studies is this idea that things happen over time in a particular order and maybe jump from one channel to the other. So here we were interested at what point people use search engines and maps in order to find and book restaurants that they're going to meet their friends in. So you can see sort of different bits of information, reviews. It doesn't explain everything, but it's a visual aid. It helps you remember and helps you capture stuff pretty quickly along the way. We've heard about co-design, so another thing you can do is get people to come in and sort of sketch themselves. Sometimes they're not so confident doing this, so we've experimented with pairing them up with an illustrator, where they do all the talking and the illustrator tries to represent what they're doing visually.
Nothing selected, just home. So just you know, whether it be the name of the app, yeah, home, exactly, perfect. And then maybe to the right of it, you have like a back screen, so that you don't. So you know, with this, I can go back to the guide and I can see what I was just looking at. Yeah, exactly. Previous screen, and that's they're always they're on the other two as well that we made. Okay. They're just constant stuff.
So we don't have any data to compare the effectiveness of this approach, but we have noticed that you know, whereas before some users who weren't that creative lost confidence very quickly. They just really didn't believe that anybody would take these sketches that they're doing seriously. Whereas now, when they see you know, how well it's coming out and how it looks like it could be a real product, they start to really believe that somebody might go off and build this. So they really put their heart into it. And it's not just screens. Sometimes it's too early to look at screens, so you might just work with the user to sketch out a story of how they would use a service and, you know, where they would be, what context, etc. So because you've had these illustrators you know, along on the research and documenting stuff as you go along, I mean, the real advantage of that is if you want to produce something stunning and visual, you don't have to go off and brief another team. You don't have to get another agency in and spend weeks doing it. It doesn't actually add any more time to the research process because it's happening in parallel with the moderators and, you know, the work that they're doing. So during analysis, it can help you visualize some of the findings in different ways. So you might want to show the end-to-end journey, where the pain points are, where the opportunities are. You might want to make those more elaborate. So obviously service designers have been using these kinds of experience maps for a while. Here you can show what technologies are used at what point, what channels, etc. You can tell stories of different people. So here's a chap who really destroyed the music industry in Portugal. He loved music. He would go into the stores every week, look at all the latest albums, record it all on his phone, and when he got home, he'd download it all for free. So, you know, very interesting chap. But you can record these stories in a kind of anonymous kind of way. Obviously, you can use it for personas, which are used a lot during early research. But then, when it comes to actually illustrating the requirements, you can do them in visual form with the stories and things like that to really get them across. So moving on swiftly, I'd like to leave you with some practical tips and advice as well. So what we've been doing at this stage, having done loads of research, is we typically invite the stakeholders in and try and do a series of workshops to turn that data into interesting ideas, and the illustrators are really helpful here. So this is one way of doing it. There's many, many different ways of doing it, but these 10 steps will get you some really good ideas in about 3 days. And we follow a kind of classical ideation process, so there'll be some stages at the beginning which are all about inspiration and trying to extract as many good ideas as possible from the research. It's all user-centered. We're not just sitting around making stuff up. The second stage is about ideation, so expanding on the best ideas and really trying to visualize them as quickly as possible. And the final stage is really about critically evaluating whether we've met the user needs. So because you've got all these visual deliverables from the research, the first thing we do is make everybody go away and look over them from the homework and come up with 10 or 20 ideas. We then organize those ideas on day one into different themes that have come out of the research, and we start to look for the key ideas. And we play some games here where everybody gets to vote on their top 5 ideas, and then you can start to see where the patterns start emerging with these various coloured dots. And the important thing here at this stage is to keep it user-centered. People may have a particular affinity for one idea they came up with, but it's really important to reinforce that these need to meet user needs and particular objectives. So we start to find the gold nuggets. Usually around this point we break into teams, and each team takes some of the top ranked ideas and maybe a few of the key ideas after that. And then we play another game which is an inspiration race. It's used in creative workshops where you put people under time pressure, so each member of the team might have 1 or 2 minutes, and they take it in turns to add an additional feature or add an additional scenario or an additional benefit, or anything they want to add to make the idea better, using the research and the stuff that we've collected earlier on to inspire them. So each person in turn would add stuff. That last guy doesn't look too interested. And then what you get is this kind of mind map of all the different features, and the illustrators are involved at this stage to start to sketch out either screens or little snippets of scenarios in terms of how these features could be used. So at the end of day one, we try to transform this into user stories. So the teams will now write a script explaining how a user would actually use some of these services, some of these features, and how they would benefit. And so on day two, we get the illustrators in, and they help to create storyboards that really sort of visually illustrate the stories. There's many different ways of doing that. And if you don't want to use illustrators, or you don't have enough to go around, we've had a lot of fun using iMovie to create films and short movies explaining the concept. So these take a little bit longer, so you have to be prepared to overrun, but they are a lot of fun. The other way we've got around having not enough illustrators in a particular group is to use Lego bricks. So you can take pictures of various Lego sets, you put these back into PowerPoint, and you overlay with various bits of details to tell the story. So this is a chap who was diagnosed with some conditions, and he wanted to keep track of the medicine that he was taking and making sure he was taking the right medicine at the right time. So he wanted, in his connected world, he wanted his connected medicine cabinet to work with his devices, to be connected to his doctor and to his pharmacy. And there were lots of benefits around doing something along those lines. And at this point it gets really, really messy. Right brain activities seem to produce a lot more mess than science does. I think I found a cold slice of pizza under one of those plates. But that's all part of the fun process. So at the end of day two, the teams start to pitch these ideas to the other teams, and the other teams have to criticize them, challenge them, make sure that they are in fact meeting user needs. And we collect all the feedback, positive and negative, and so on day three the teams have to now go and improve their ideas and address some of the challenges. And then they pitch again. So this is a kind of Dragon's Den activity. But they have all the storyboards, all the visual stimulus to really help them explain their ideas. And the benefit of this is not just that it improves the ideas and makes them more user-centered. The stakeholders are going to have to go back and explain the benefits of these ideas to other stakeholders, to their team members, to their managers, to their organizations. So this is their opportunity to practice their elevator pitch and create some stimulus that will help them. Are we doing for time? Okay, so the final stage, which is something that we do throughout the process to try and evaluate more critically against user needs. So you might have a checklist of all the user needs, you might have personas and various documents from the research. So at this stage, we kind of go through all of that and try and come up with activities that are fun, where people evaluate how well they've done. I better make a move on because Chandra's giving me stares. So, I mean, that's really it. The rest will go quite quickly. After you've done all of that, you already have all the visual assets that you need to really communicate in your reports. So it's just a case of tidying them up. I mean, a popular way of doing this is with storyboards that explain how a new service would work. Because we're UXers, you know, we can go into a bit more detail and sketch out what the screens might be doing, or we can go out a level and be more strategic and talk about how different devices will connect to each other. This is another example for a company that was trying to upsell lots of additional services to their customers. And so what we wanted to show is that depending on the different context that customers were in, you could upsell particular parts of different services that would really appeal to them and really help them to understand that. You can use it with user profiling to show the needs of different users. And then you can compare those user needs between different types of personas and users. And you know, you're literally unlimited in the ways that you can visualize your information. I don't have time to go through all of these, but I'll happily talk about them afterwards if anyone's interested. You can, of course, make posters as well. I mean, you can do these just with regular sort of, you know, creative visual designers, but if you have illustrators, it can be a little bit quicker. Sometimes illustration is not the appropriate way to show data, so you have to think about other ways of doing it. And you can even use it for usability test results. So this is where we've tried to summarize the main key issues that occurred during a series of usability tests and how that relates to visits to the offline store. And you can actually map layers onto the top of this. So this is what some of the web analytics were saying. And I don't know if I've got time to go into this, not really. No, okay, I can talk about this later. But in summary, the main benefits of sort of using illustrators and visual thinking in this kind of process is that you get immediate outputs if you're doing it live and a part of your team. You can use it with users and stakeholders. It helps, you know, the team arrive at a shared vision. That is really, really important when trying to move forward and making sure that the ideas that get taken on board are really user-centered. It helps people remember better. It can be engaging and fun. Because you get immediate outputs, you can get immediate feedback. You can literally show the sketches straight back to the people that you're getting the data from and make sure that you've understood exactly what they wanted. And it helps to overcome language barriers. And I'm going to leave it there. So thank you very much for listening.
I'm sorry to cut you short, but I know that, you know, there's rumbling tummies going on. Okay, anybody got any questions for Philip or Felipe? Down here in the front.
Yeah, it's quite clear that sketches communicate so much more than text does. But sometimes they communicate more than you intend them to. For example, in one of your early slides there, I noticed the woman was carrying a handbag, some shopping and a baby, whereas the more serious work of research was two men, both of them white. Now you might think, oh, I'm reading too much into this, but if you look at any historical book on this style of drawing, everything is so set and drenched in the cultural norms of its day that going back in time, you see examples that are painfully sexist, painfully racist. Text, for all its faults, is quite easily auditable to see whether those things are creeping into it. How can you ensure that you're not doing the same thing with stereotypes when it comes to this type of illustration?
Felipe, jump in as well if you have. You take the difficult ones.
Well, it's a very interesting question, I have to say. Well, I mean, we never came up with this problem through all the work we've done. I think most of this is discussed before with the client in advance, so we never just go out there and draw anything with the specific characteristics. Normally, the type of style we use is very, if you see people have no kind of features physically, they tend to be quite normal, so you can only distinguish women and men. So we try to keep it very simple. We try to enhance the actual activity, or when they use a device, or when they actually doing something which is relevant for the research in terms of UX, but not really to bring up any characteristics or be racist or anything like that.
But I think part of the problem, though, is that the reason why, in the historical examples I gave you, people don't notice them is because it's the cultural norms of the day. That's why sexism and racism get invisibilized. And to go to your example, if you look at all the characters that you claim don't have distinctive traits, they actually very much have the style of middle-class white women in terms of the style of hair and the style of clothing that they wear.
That's probably a fair comment. We should diversify a little bit. I mean, one of the things that we've noticed is when we go out and do the research, and somebody like Felipe is sketching, we used to not show what we were drawing to the participants. And then they started taking interest, what are you drawing? And the moment they identified themselves in one of the drawings, they would call all their friends over and they would really engage, they'd really get excited. So then we started making them even more identifiable, like really if somebody was a particular race or gender or a particular style of clothing, we would really make that clear, and people love to see themselves in the drawing, so it can work to your benefit as well in that particular scenario. But thank you for your question.
Any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned earlier in the innovation stage, sometimes when the user doesn't actually know what they want, you kind of present them with a picture and let them play with it so they can adjust and make some changes. With that, isn't there a danger of setting a scene in the user's mind, that what they should be doing instead of getting the scene from them?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So it's not appropriate every time you do research, and most of the times we try to avoid it, and first of all go out, observe, make our own observations. Sometimes the stakeholders really want to test some sort of concept, and what you would do is you'd leave it to the very end. And you would first gather all your data and then show them those concepts at the very end when they can't really affect the data that you're getting from them. Another way of doing it is to have maybe a series of these scenario sketches, concepts, and only when something triggers, like say you're going around somebody's home and they take you into the kitchen and they show you some issues they have with their microwave, and you happen to just have a concept around microwaves. That's the point at which you could perhaps show it to them and discuss it, but you wouldn't show them any of the other concepts at that stage.
So you're saying that we can carry on working on these illustrations in the back end, but not actually present them to the user in the first stages?
Ideally, you would capture your illustrations as you're observing them, and you would probably want to show them to the user at the end of the session if there's anything complicated that you want to make sure you've understood. But the ones that you prepared beforehand, you're right, you have to be very careful how you use that and when you show them.
On the far side?
See how that would be useful input, but how do you manage their expectations that, because I guess there's a risk that the final product might be very different to what they've designed based on the other inputs. So is there a risk that that person might be really disappointed saying, oh, well, I thought that was there, because it might come out that way?
I guess they could be really disappointed if they've just told all their friends that this product is being built and it's different. I mean, we try to manage that and just explain to them at the beginning of the session, the briefing, that we're not fully in control of what gets designed and built, but using these techniques means that we can communicate exactly what you want as clearly as possible. So it helps to make our case stronger to perhaps get you those features and get you that design. but it's not fully in our control, and I think they understand that. But thanks for the question.
Matthew?
Sorry, just other than hire a UX illustrator, I mean, what advice would you give to like a UX team that's skeptical about drawing because they're from psychology or HCI or computer science backgrounds? They really aren't comfortable drawing, and sticking them on a training course, maybe they're still going to still feel uncomfortable at the end of that. So, how do you kind of embed that in the UX team's kind of process?
To try and get them to do the drawing.
Exactly.
So some people claim everyone can draw and it doesn't matter how well or badly, and the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And I guess the first step might be to get somebody who's more of a professional to run a course, but then also to identify opportunities when they can try and use it. And I guess then you're just having to see what feedback you're getting, and if they feel they've unlocked some sort of creative potential that otherwise they wouldn't have unlocked. And I guess you're looking for that positive feedback just from trying it in different situations. We've just been experimenting, like a lot of the areas where we've tried it wasn't from a book, we just thought we'd try it, and sometimes it hasn't worked. So you have to trial and error through it sometimes.
Felipe, do you have a top tip?
Just hire UX illustrators.
Dave, last question.
This is obviously very useful for forcing you to cut down to key points and to really get to the nub of issues out there. But how much do you concern about the wastage of all the other ideas and information that you're in there cannot make its way into simple illustrations of scenarios and so on. So I guess how do you capture all the other stuff that's around there, or how much do you worry about losing it? Because I would assume that the knock-on is then that there's a danger you're designing to the average and not full on.
What do you mean by the other stuff? Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, the information that you gather around possible scenarios of what people do and different things that they do, and then you try and get that down into something that makes sense as a story or as a set of stories. There must be a lot more information that doesn't make it into the final drawings.
Yeah, I understand. So we often have a written record as well, some sort of log of all the data. We have the videos, we have transcripts, things like that, pictures. Normally you would go through a process of analysis anyway to figure out what your top recommendations are. So I guess in this case, the final kind of ideas that we really push to the designers are the result of that process. That's really no different. We would make sure that the things that we believe are really important, because they're high priority, we've observed a lot of them, that they do get into the visualizations and they do get communicated. If you want to add anything.
Okay, thank you very much. I think Philip is certainly sticking around for a little while, is he? So if you did want to have a look at some more of those visualizations, then do that. Are you sticking around for lunch as well? So do ask Felipe over lunch if you have any questions about